Plan. It is now time for emerging issues. So in this one, we're going to be going through winger fullback. And what we're doing here, B, is we're going to have a look and reflect at the position that I think this year is going to be probably the hardest one to fill from round one.
Yeah, that's it. We've been saying it throughout the entire preseason is that this seems to be the problematic position where there's not that much surety. There's not that many good mid-rangers. The mid-rangers that we like have the bye. And there's only really the one clear-cut bye, which is Isaiah Iongi. But apart from that, it's just about what you want your team balance to look like.
Yeah, it does. And now we've certainly been handed a bit of a gift here with Savelio Tamale, the former Dragon, former Waratah Junior, scoring 49. Now, obviously, we'll talk about the Raiders Warriors later in the podcast, but I think the thing that we saw from Tamale, and this is what we wanted to see, is that what his New South Wales Cup stats show us in terms of fantasy relevance came out in the NRL.
Exactly right. He had the exact game that we thought he was going to be, like a mini Brian To'o, tackle breaking. Only had, I think, 3 tackles in the whole game, but all of his, and no tries in this as well for the 49. So he's done exactly what you want. And if anyone had been watching the looping videos as well, he's been the perfect candidate for that wing fullback loop.
Yeah, he certainly has. So I'll show you an example of what that does look like, and this is what my team currently looks like. Before TLT 1B, as you can see, Horsburgh and Yo VC and C, happy with that combo there. But just focusing on the loop, see Tamale in slot 7, which is where we recommend you put him if you wanted to do that starting slot loop. Jane Campbell in that starting winger fullback, that loop will take place when the Storm take on the Eels in that final game. So pretty simple execution there. Otherwise, you could use him at position 5 and then just have your Titans player there. But that's an example there. But I think, B, what we want to see from Tamale now is that obviously one game looks pretty good. We're probably actually comfortable now just to start him as a winger fullback for the first few weeks of the season.
Yeah, depending on what you've done with your team. So me personally, I'm still going to be having him on my bench because I actually invested a fair bit in my wing fullback with Kalen Ponga. AJ Brimson will be back next week and Iongi. So I think those 3 are my guys there. But the beauty that he has there as well, his dual position, if you want him to start as your centre, I know we're sport for centres at the moment, but if you think he's a better option at centre than, let's say, Toya doesn't have a good game or Purdue isn't that great or whoever, you have those opportunities to be able to slot him in 2 different positions.
Yes, and the beauty with the Raiders, they don't have a bye to round 15, so he'll actually be available as long as they're competitive and winning games. Like, this is a great start to the season for him. Yeah, he's going to be there as an option. Now, just rolling into those Titans guys we've mentioned before. We've already mentioned Campbell, we've mentioned Brimson, and Keanu Kinney is the other one. Depending on how you've got your team set up, it looks like if you're trying to do a Tamale Cole double loop like me, you're probably just going to be taking one of them. And as we spoke about last week, you probably just want to take the guy that you are most keen on, irrespective of the price point.
Yeah, exactly right. It depends on your love for them. If you're wanting to go the mid-ranger to make some money so you can spend up in your squad elsewhere, or Jaden Campbell, who by those trials, he looks like he could be the number 1 wing fullback for the entire game. So if you wanted to take the punt early on him, he looked fantastic. So, it's either one of those 2. I think Keanu Keeney, if you're going to be buying him, you may as well spend the extra 70 grand on Campbell personally. But if you also love Keanu Keeney, then you're not going to get talked out of it by me.
No, definitely not. And the thing is, as well, is that essentially this Titans player, if you're using the starting slot loop, scores 49 for you this week, which is pretty good considering they don't actually play. So that's where Tamale has come in massive for those loopers. Now, if you have looped Tamale, like we've seen from myself there, and you got your Titans play, that's 2 of your winger fullback slots sorted. You spoke about Isaiah Yongi there. He's going to be the 3rd guy for people in that scenario, but for those that aren't looping, they just played Tamale in the starting slot. Yongi, again, assuming he's named on TLT 1B, he's just got to be in your team somewhere.
Yeah, he looked fantastic in the trials too. Very fantasy relevant game, like that try that he scored. Also the one that he set up. I thought he was looking really, really good. And we've got him for 350k. He besides Cleary, I'm presuming he's the 2nd most owned player in the game. Yeah, 52.2% at time of recording.
Yeah, and I think that'll only continue to rise because, yeah, like you said, the fact that he's come from that Panthers system makes him a very, very good option. 350k, happy days. Now, they're probably the obvious picks that we're looking at here, where we take Tamale, potentially a Titan Looper, and Iongi. And then from this point, it sort of spreads out across the board, and we're seeing some different strategies with, different creators promoting different strategies. And we're obviously big at Talking League on Ruben Garrick. He's got that cheat code buy schedule. Now, B, we spoke about it in the first edition of Emerging Issues, but for the punters that might have missed that one, do you just want to briefly explain why two of his buys this year basically don't matter?
So is that because, are you alluding to the minor buy rounds?
Yeah.
Yeah, so because last year we had minor buy rounds, you had to field 13. Field 17, sorry. This year you only have to field 13. So you don't have as many teams that are away from the actual game. So you actually can field a team a little bit easier. The fact that Ruben Garrick's also got that dual position, you can start him as a wing fullback, but you've still got your keeper centre for the year.
Yeah, so he's only got one standalone buy in round 9, which is Magic round, so they've decided not to participate this year. They're giving Broncos another home game, so I guess they've done something for society there. But yeah, Ruben Garrick, he's going to be very, very popular. Slot him in your centres, slot him in your winger fullbacks, and then once your centres that are cheap go, or Drinkwater or Tedesco becomes cheaper, we can grab them. But moving to our next guys that are somewhat popular, obviously Kalen Pong has over 30% ownership at the time of recording. Greg Marju's also got a decent amount of ownership there, and I think we're both keen on these two players, I haven't got either in my team, as we saw just before, but it does throw up a little bit of a challenge if you took one or both of these, because they do have a round 4 bye.
Yeah, I don't think you can take both because, again, the position's so bare. Like I'm running with 5 wing fullbacks right now, or 5 eligible wing fullbacks, and I've got Ponga. But if I had Marzu, then all of a sudden I've got to be reliant on the 3 others that I would have to actually play. And then all it takes is an injury or a suspension, or Tamale gets dropped or something. All of a sudden you're scrambling to make another trade. So I don't mind either option. I think KP is a fantastic buy, especially with all the attack has to go through him. And as soon as Latrell went down, that's when Ponga's ownership skyrocketed, I think.
Yeah, it certainly did. And like you said there, he'll be involved in all facets of the game. I think Marju's actually out of pre-season this year, so again, if I see him in people's teams, I'm more than happy to sign off on that. And like you mentioned there with that round 4 bye, it's probably the crunch point. I know for me it was last year, and again, we can't always take what happened last year and predict that it'll happen this year, but you have 3 rounds of football, which means there's 3 rounds of potential suspensions, injuries, and HIAs, or concussions that can pop up. And we've mentioned a couple of times, I know you have on this series this year, B, is that until round 7, we only get 2 trades. So we've just got to be careful that with that round 4, 5, 6 buys, which is the Knights, the Warriors, and the Bulldogs, that we don't carry too many of those players, because if we do get that bad luck with a couple of concussions and an injury, it might actually be hard to field a 17 in those with 2 guys missing due to the bye.
Yeah, that's been a strategy of mine this year as well, is to try and not have players who have that round 1 to 6 buy, unless they're obvious buys, like a Kalen Pong or even a Luke Metcalf, which we'll obviously get into a little bit later of why it's not an obvious buy. But it's just something you got to be really, really careful of, because those limited trades, you don't have as much flexibility, and chaos can ensue early on in this game.
Yes, and Pong is a great example of that. He's had a few concussions in his career. Thankfully, recently he's been able to dodge most of those, but again, it's just one of those random luck things. And Ruben Garrick's another one of those as well, that if you're factoring him into your winger fullbacks with one of these Knights guys, that could be the time that Ruben Garrick's head gets folded in due to an interesting tackling technique from an opponent. But the last guy that we do want to put on the plate here is one that's also quite popular, nearly 20%, and it's another rugby convert like Savelio Tamale, and that's Mark Nwanga-Nitawaze. Now, currently only winger fullback and 350k in the app. Expecting him to be centre and get that duel, and I think if he gets that B, look, we know Billy Smith has supposedly got this mortgage on that left centre spot, but with his fitness concerns over the last few years, I think if Nwanga-Nitawaze is named to start, that near 20% might actually push closer to 25%.
Yeah, I think he's going to be super popular. It's not one for me because, again, I've already sorted out my wing fullbacks, and we've all got cheap centres that are 100 grand cheaper than him. So, but I'm not going to talk people out of it. If they think he's got the job security, or let's say he kills it at left centre, but Billy Smith comes back, what's to stop Mark going to the right and Toya getting dropped? There's so many what ifs that are going to happen in that Roosters backline for the centres. So, not one for me, but I can also see the appeal.
Yeah, I'm lining him up. I think if he gets named, Jack Bird doesn't start. As we would have seen in my team there that had 4 edges in it outside of Jack Bird, I'm pretty keen to take a punt on Nwanga Tawazi because he's certainly got the fantasy chops, and he's a wallaby. Like he's going to run hard, he's going to tackle hard, he's going to make offloads, and he's going to have that creative play to set up try assists and the like. So before we exit emerging issues for this week, B, I think the thing that we do want to point out to the punters here is that with your winger fullbacks, you need to probably work out what your minimum that you're willing to take into round one. For me personally, I'd want at least 4, but do you sit on 4 or would you prefer to have at least 5?
I'd prefer to have 5, which is why I kind of constructed my team the way I have, because you got to fill 3 spots. So, and if they're all in different teams, then maybe you can get away with 4, but I'd prefer 5, but it's only if you're happy with the players. Like, don't just go out and buy a wing fullback for the sake of it. Make sure you're happy with that player.
Yes, that's the key thing. Always look for that value. And I think the thing as well that we want to attach to that is making sure that you identify the standalone as opposed to the stand love buy cover for those first 5 to 6 rounds. So specifically for the Knights, I think they're the big one here. So if you are taking a Pong, you are taking a Marju, you probably do want to have those 5 players with that winger fullback eligibility. If you've only got no buys in that period outside of maybe your Titans guy, you could probably get away with 4, but at the absolute minimum, you need 4 winger fullbacks.
Yep, totally agree.
Yep. And then, of course, what we're going to do is we're going to hold those guys. We're going to wait till the likes of Scott Drinkwater, James Tedesco drop in price, pick them up for bargains, cycle out our cheaper players, and then we're going to absolutely love it. But that wraps up this week's edition of Emerging Issues. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. If you are listening to this on the podcast, again, feel free to check this out on YouTube with more visual aids, specifically